Hey guys, we're getting right back into it with the Build for Ukraine Part 7. We're going to be putting together the front suspension. So the first thing we got to do is cut all our parts out. It's a very intricate setup. Quite a few parts to go to this front suspension. And once we get everything cut out and we find everything we need, then we're going to go ahead and get the paint. Alright, now we have all of our front suspension components cleaned up and cut off the trees. We got a total of 8 parts, not including the steering linkage that goes from the steering box down to the actual steering coupling, I don't know what you would call it in this car. But here we have all our parts arranged and ready to go to paint. Not too much cleaning needed, as this is a very nicely molded kit. Okay, here we're starting with the steering linkage. This is painted in a base color of Vallejo steel, and then I'm going to be using the all-clad burnt carbon to add some shadowing and shading to the part so that it doesn't look flat. I find that when you do this, it gives it more of a three-dimensional quality, adding the shadows, and brings it more in scale as to what the part would look like if you were really looking at it. And here's the finished part. You can see the areas I've darkened cast sort of like shadows on the part. Gives you a little bit of different tones in the metal. Looks a little more realistic, at least to me it does. Now we're going to continue with the rest of the front suspension parts, and then we're going to start our assembly. Now we have all the parts assembled after painting. You can see the tonal differences in the metal and how you can see lights and darks in it. That's what I mean by putting a little more realism into it and bringing them into scale. Now that we've taken care of the way the light hits the part and have our shadows all simulated on the parts to give them a more realistic and in-scale look, now we're going to be using Tamiya panel line paint to bring out all of the details, as we're going to allow it to run into all the cracks and crevices in the part, and that's going to highlight all the lines of the part and will give you a much more realistic appearance. Now here we have the finished front subframe. You can see what a difference the Tamiya panel line paint makes. Along with all of the painting, it just really brings the part almost to what I like to call an in-scale appearance, which means that the lights and the darks now appear as they would if it was a full-size part. And this is the illusion you have to create when dealing with a small scale item to try and make it look large. You can place the shadows, the lights, the darks right where you need them, and then highlight all of the details in it so that they stand out as you're looking at them, the way they would if you looked at the real part. Now I'm going to be using Model Masters brass to bring out the details in the bolts and all the attaching parts on the control arms and various other parts on the front suspension. That's just highlighting more of the details, making it a little more visually interesting when you take a look at the part. And here we have the finished control arms. Don't know if you can really make it out there, but you can see the bolts are all painted, and the part is just a lot more interesting to look at than it was previously when everything was just one color. Now we're going to continue detail painting all of the other parts of the front suspension before we start with assembly. So let's speed this up. Okay, we have all the parts painted. Everything's ready for assembly now. If you look carefully, you can make out the Model Master's brass that's on all of the bolts and attachment points for the parts there. It's just a little bit of detail that I think adds a little more realism, and for me it's just fun to do. I like everything as visually interesting as I can make it because I just enjoy looking at all the different components. I also treat each piece as an individual kit so that all the detailing that I can do to it, I will do to it. It just helps me, I think, to get the most out of a model kit, and is one of the reasons I enjoy building so much. Okay, I'm just going to go over a little bit of the assembly on this kit that is not apparently super clear on the instructions. Now they want you to mount this piece here to the front cross member, which is not sure what this is. This looks like part of the front cross member, maybe the spindle assembly. I'm not really sure. Now the instructions I'm gonna put up right now will show you very loosely how these pieces are supposed to go together. Not really very clear, so I'm just going to show you what I figured out after a little bit of trial fitting. This piece here attaches to the cross member like so. This block here, see this little piece here on the bottom here, slots into this piece here like so. And it completes this rounded shape of the end of this here, as I'll show you on this side, so that it all becomes one part there. You can see it's the rounded edge there, which in hindsight I probably should have glued together first and then painted, but I wasn't really aware of this until now. Not something you really notice, but for those of you who want to keep it as authentic as possible, you might want to just do that and seal off all these seams here, which the real car may or may not have. I don't know. But that is exactly how that goes mounted. Okay, so what I've done is remove the paint from the contact areas here. And here. And now I'm just going to apply a little bit of super glue. And now all we have to do is join now. The alignment is critical here, as this is part of your suspension. And there we go. The first part of our subframe is complete. All right, now we've got to attach our spindle assembly, which apparently is going to mount according to the instructions. Again, this is not super clear, but sure you can figure it out. But let me just help you guys out with a little info. There's a small tab on the end of this little spindle here that you can see I've scraped the paint off of. Right there. That tab is going to insert into the slot on the top here. And it's already shaped to hold the arm in the desired position like so. It's actually a pretty good fit even without glue. All right, now let's put a little bit of that super glue on there, and I hope I'm getting it right. So there we have the other arm attached. Now, we have what appears to be a control arm that attaches there. Again, not 100% clear, but there appears to be a tab on the control arm there. That large tab right there. And that tab is going to slot into the slot right there underneath the control arm which we just attached. So control arm spindle, whatever it is that we just attached. So first thing we have to do is to find the correct arm and then figure out exactly how this gets mounted to there. We have this here. Okay, that pointed section goes up and that's going to slot right in there somehow, apparently. Let's see. And that is where that arm goes. This is the strangest suspension setup I've ever seen. I'm not familiar with this car at all, but thinking this is going to work. Should have researched it a little bit better, and I could have assembled it before I did all the painting, but hey, live and learn. Alright guys, just a little more, one more note on the front suspension here. I noticed that when I put the two control arms here on each side, well, let me show it this way, this side and this side, that the bar that runs across between them, which I'm assuming is a steering linkage, isn't long enough if you don't have them, the two control arms just bent inward slightly in order for the bar to reach. So you have to bend it in a little bit this way, a little bit that way. They can't sit perfectly straight, or the ends will be too far out and the bar won't be long enough to fit. So you just have to massage them in a little bit. Best to use a slower setting glue on this instead of the super glue, so give you time to move everything around and hold it together, and you can put the bar on. Now another thing, the instructions show you the front subframe in this position, and it tells you to install the bar. Not exactly clear exactly how you're supposed to install it, but just so you know, it's installed from the underside of the subframe, not from this side the way it shows in the instructions. It's not 100% clear on that, so I just want to let you guys know. But here we have the subframe is finished, detail painted. Gonna do a little bit of weathering on it, attach it to the front of the chassis, and then we'll be done with the front suspension. Okay, attaching the front subframe to the chassis is pretty straightforward. You just got two small notches on the subframe, let's see, here, and you're just gonna line them up with the two tabs in the mounting points there. Pretty simple. Just clean off all your paint so you get a nice secure bond. And now let's do a little super glue and pop this puppy on there. Now we have a nice, really tight fit. Could be because of all the paint that I've put on this thing, but went on there nice and secure. And now the strangest front end I've ever seen on a car is pretty much complete, aside from a little bit of weathering. Throw a little bit of rust on it, little dirt just to make it look used. We've already done our shading of it so that it doesn't look like a brand new part. Very happy with the way it came out. All of our bolts are highlighted. very pleased with the way this looks. Now I just hope that it sits straight, because this was a very weird suspension, kind of tricky to put together. Alright guys, we have the front end completely finished now with the steering linkage installed. One thing I got to tell you about that is that it gets a little bit tricky. The steering box here that goes attached to the frame is supposed to sit in a notch here in the frame. That notch on this particular car was a little too small, so you may have to enlarge that. There's a little bit of a fitment issue there. And then installing the steering shaft is very easy, as it's just one attachment point here, one attachment point here, and the whole thing just goes together. So here we have the completed front end and steering assembly. For another step down on this build. Alright guys, that pretty much completes the entire front end assembly of this car, including the steering linkage. And now we're on to the next portion of the build. So stay tuned, it's gonna get better.